Please welcome Michael Field.
Jet ski cruising around on the surface of our life when inciting incidents are showing up day after day after day that are meant to propel you to the woman or the man that God has created you to be. And my hope this morning is that we can trade our jet skis in for some scuba gear, okay? So that we can, So let's trade our jet skis in for some scuba gear and take a little bit of a dive this morning and get down a little bit deeper to see what God might be calling us to and to what God might want to do in our lives through these inciting incidents. Have you ever thought of the inciting incidents in your life? Have you ever thought of them? It might have been, they can be good or bad, right? So it can kind of be anything, but our response to these inciting incidents is a really big deal. So it can be the divorce of your parents, the death of a loved one. It could be you getting accepted to that college on scholarship. It could be you getting that new job. These are the inciting incidents that move us towards who we're created to be. For me, one of the biggest inciting incidents in my life happened between me and my now wife. I wanted to get married when I, started to realize that marriage was a thing, right? That was something that I want. So I'm the main character and I want something. My great obstacle that I had to get over was my parents' divorce when I was 12. And I thought their marriage was perfect, and then there was infidelity involved, and I was just like, I don't want to end up like my parents ended up like. And so every relationship that I was in, I carried this bag of tricks with me to the relationship. Everybody hear the phrase, wherever you go, there you are? That was my story. Wherever I went, there I was, no matter who the girl was. In my mind, I always thought there was something wrong with her and that this just wasn't right. And that was true, but then I found, and that was true, but then I met this girl named Faith. I met her just by accident, just met her for 2 minutes. And we talked for 2 minutes. I walked away, and I told my buddy who was with me I could marry a girl like that. So I MySpaced her. Yes, MySpaced her. I MySpaced, and we go back and forth, but I was so scared and so weak and so unintentional that we MySpaced for like 4 months before I took her on a date, right? Don't do that, guys. So I did that, and then we go out. So we start going out. It's going well. It's great. We're dating. It's amazing. We're a little bit older. It keeps going great, but then the story keeps going on, and we keep dating, and it's kind of going okay, and the story keeps going on, and we keep dating, and there's no ring. There's no commitment. And my wife, bless her soul, she's strong and feisty. She woke up on her 30th birthday. Talk about an inciting incident. She woke up on her 30th birthday and said, this dude is too scared to marry me, but he's too scared to break up with me. And so she broke up with me on her 30th birthday. Talk about inciting incident for me, right? So I'll never forget in the time that we were broken up, I was sitting with my buddy and had this moment, and it was my aha moment. You have these aha moments, right? It was this aha moment of I was telling my buddy, who was my best friend, I would tell him over and over and over again, my parents got divorced, so I'm afraid of being married, and I realize that wherever I go, there I am, and I think it could work with Faith, but I'm just so scared, and I kept telling the same story, and after a while, you ever realize that same story keeps coming out of your mouth? It's finally like a good friend will put a mirror up to your face and say, hey bro, you've been saying this for 10 years. And I had this aha moment where I realized I would be 60 years old and say, man, I'm the main character of my story. I really wanted to get married, but it was just, when I was 12, my parents got divorced. It's like, what 60-year-old has a good story when they look back and say their parents got divorced when they were 12, so they didn't get married? And that propelled me. I want you to hear that. Inciting incidents create heroes, and inciting incidents create villains. Inciting incidents create good stories, and inciting incidents create tragedy. So, and this is the thing, whether the story is about a hero or a villain, or if it's a good story or an awful story, all depends on how the main character responds to the inciting incident, right? So that when inciting incident comes in, it's all on the main character's response to that inciting incident. That's what dictates whether this is a good story or not. So I want to get into Paul And documentaries always do this. They show you the end at the beginning. Have you noticed that? If you watch a documentary, they'll show you the end at the very beginning of the documentary, and then it's like they rewind and then show you the whole story up to that end point. But they show you the end. So I'm going to show you the end. I'm going to show you the final product of Paul, of what Paul became. And he has a little bit of a glimpse back into who he was within this, but this is who Paul turned out to be. It's in Philippians 3, verse 1, if you're following along. Philippians 3, verse 1. This is who Paul becomes, and he gives us a glimpse into who he was before that. Further, my brothers and sisters, rejoice in the Lord. It is no trouble for me to write the same things to you again, and it is a safeguard for you. Watch out for those dogs, those evildoers, those mutilators of the flesh. For it is we who are the circumcision, we who serve God by his Spirit, who boast in Christ Jesus and who put no confidence in the flesh, though I myself have reasons for such confidence. So he's telling us who he was. If someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness based on the law, faultless. And now we see Paul, the main character, and who he ended up to be. So that's who he was, and this is now who he is. He says, but whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, I consider them dung, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith. I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. Man, I love this. So that's who Paul became, right? Paul became this man who loved Jesus. But he has this he harkens back in the beginning and says, I was the main character. We're going to view Paul's story through this lens of any good story, right? So Paul was the main character. Paul was the main character, and he was just pursuing righteousness. That's all he wanted. He had more zeal than anybody. He kept more laws. He abstained from more foods. He kept away from the wrong people. He persecuted the church. Paul just wanted righteousness. That's exactly what Paul wanted. That's what his story was all about. Paul wanted righteousness. So if we were going to look at Paul's story in the framework of story, it would be Paul, main character. The thing that he wanted so badly was righteousness, and he was willing to overcome anything, denying himself, obeying every law, even persecuting Christians, to attain the righteousness that he thought he was meant for, that he was made for, and that he was called to. Does that make sense, what Paul's story was? Now let's look at the inciting incident. I love this inciting incident, and this is the point of everything I'm saying today. So catch this, Acts 9, verse 1. This is Paul's inciting incident. Remember, Paul, a Pharisee, just with a zeal for righteousness. He wants that so badly. He's doing anything he can to overcome any obstacle that gets in the way of his righteousness, including persecuting Christians, so that he can be the man that he believes that God has called him to be. And then Acts 9, verse 1, we see Paul's inciting incident. Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found anyone who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting, he replied. Now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Remember, an inciting incident is something that knocks the equilibrium of your story off. It's something that knocks the story off balance. It's not business as usual anymore when the inciting incident shows up, and Jesus literally shows up and knocks Paul off of his horse. He knocks Paul to the ground. Jesus was Paul's inciting incident. This man who wanted righteousness and was willing to do anything to get that righteousness experiences an inciting incident unlike any other inciting incident. And I want you to hear this. The role of most inciting incidents is just to propel you towards the great obstacle and help you overcome it, right? So that's the goal of any inciting incident. It's just going to propel you towards the great obstacle so that you can overcome that great obstacle out there. There's a great obstacle out there. I want something beyond it. This inciting incident will propel me over that. But Jesus flips the script on the entire idea of an inciting incident in Paul's story, because he doesn't just propel Paul towards his great obstacle to overcome something. He comes as the great inciting incident and he overcomes Paul. He overcomes Paul. He doesn't help Paul overcome something else out there. He says, Paul, the biggest obstacle in the story of your life that is meant to be overcome is you and your heart. That's who our God is. And that's what our stories are about. So much different than any story that we read or any story that we watch. We always see the great obstacle as something out there that we need to overcome. God, help me get to my goal. God, come alongside me and help me get where I know that I need to be. But he's saying over and over and over again, the great obstacle isn't out there. It's right here. I just want your heart. I just want your heart. And watch what happens when I overcome your heart and you surrender your heart to me. What you want, I change what you wanted in the first place. Paul wanted something so much different in the first place. He wanted his own righteousness, and he was killing Christians because of it. And Jesus overcomes Paul as the great inciting incident, and he changes his heart. He changes every single thing that he wanted, to where we see Paul at the end saying, everything that I used to think was worthy, I now consider dung because of this great inciting incident that has overcome me. My heart is completely changed, and I want something completely different because of this great inciting incident that has overcome me. And I love that. And the beautiful thing is he overcomes it, and then because he's overcome everything in the world, he takes us and uses us to fulfill his will in this earth. And I think sometimes we forget that we're actually in a bigger story, right? That like this is our story and Jesus comes as the great inciting incident into our story, but God's story goes a little something like, for God, main character, so loved the world, his deep desire, right? The thing that he wants more than anything, that he gave his only begotten son, and that's the great obstacle that he overcame, overcoming sin, death, and the grave, so that none of us may perish but have everlasting life. That's his story. Are we going to let his story reign and rule in our lives and in this church? Or are we going to be so obsessed and tight-fisted about our stories that we will never realize that inciting incident after inciting incident after inciting incident show up day after day after day in the person of Jesus Christ in our lives? And he's saying, I haven't come to help you just overcome the thing that you think you need to overcome to be the person that you need to be. I came to overcome you and change your heart so it'll line up with mine to accomplish my will and my purposes in this world. That's who our God is. That's what story is about. That's what the story of our lives are about. So what's the greatest obstacle in your story? That's easy. It's you. What's the greatest obstacle in my story? That's easy. It's me. It's my heart. What's the greatest obstacle in this church, in our church? That's easy. It's you. What's the greatest obstacle in our church? It's easy. It's me. It's us and our hearts being overcome by the great inciting incident, Jesus, and us moving from a posture of closed fists to open hands to what he has to bring. There's no great story without a great challenge. My prayer for you and my hope for you is that you get off the jet ski. Get off the jet ski. Get off of the surface of your life and dive deep and ask, what kind of story am I living? Because the great challenge of your life, there will be many challenges along the way. There's no greater challenge for us because of our nature than to give our hearts in surrender to Jesus. But that's the only place that our hearts will ever find home and find rest and find peace and find their truest and deepest sense of calling and fulfillment. One last story, and then I'll be done. This is to the leaders in the room as you lead in your life. I had a friend who was overseeing kind of a youth group. And they were going on this trip, and they went to Yosemite. Anybody been to Yosemite before? Just like crazy big, like just huge, huge mountains and huge trees. So my friend was taking kids on a hike, and it was just going to be a day hike. They weren't going to go, they didn't need flashlights, they didn't really need food, they were just going up to the top of a waterfall and back. It was like a 4-mile round trip hike, right? And so he's 20 years old, leading a bunch of high schoolers, so there's not a huge separation in age. And so he goes up the mountain. If you picture a mountain, he goes up on these things called switchbacks that just go back and forth, and that leads to the waterfall. There's another group with another leader who just goes straight up the side of the waterfall and meet them up there. The people who go straight up the side of the waterfall get there a lot quicker, but the view is much more beautiful on the switchbacks, right? Because you just see more. They get up there and they meet. The two groups talk. The group that went up the mountain on the switchback says to the group who went up the waterfall, you should come back down this way because our way is way more beautiful and you'll like it. It'll be like a little change of pace, change of view. So the other group's like, cool, we're going to stay here a little longer. You go, we'll come back behind you, and we'll see you back at the car. And so my friend said, cool. They go down. They're coming down the switchbacks, and they come to a fork in the road that is a little bit unfamiliar to them. They don't know if they're supposed to go left or they're supposed to go right. And so they say, we're going to sit here and wait because we know there's a group behind us and they're not going to know the way. This is really confusing. So we're just going to sit here and wait until this other group comes. And as they sit there and as they wait, it starts to get a little dark. And as they sit there and wait, if there's lights in here, if we could do it, just start to dim the lights a little bit. Anybody? Light guy? It just helps the story. It just starts to get a little darker, right? And as they're sitting there and they're waiting, it gets darker. If we could kill these, that'd be awesome. It gets darker and darker and darker until they're sitting there and they're like, oh my gosh, these people have not come behind us, the other group, and we're sitting here, and it's getting dark and there's not a moon out. So we better get on our way. We don't know what happened to that other group. We'll leave them out here. We're just going to get on our way and get back to the car. So they start, and they go for 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes on the path that they thought was the right way, they realize it was the wrong way. And at this point, he says it's so dark that he literally can't see his hand in front of his face. And he has 12 high schoolers with him, and there's no flashlight because this was a day trip. And so he's sitting there, and he's like, does anybody have a flashlight? And this girl's like, I don't have a flashlight, but I have a camera that has a flash on it. And this was before digital. It was just like film. No cell phones. That's why this story, there's a great obstacle in the story because there's no cell phones. Everybody had pagers on, I think. And so this girl's like, well, I have a camera with a flash on it. And so he's like, cool, I'll take the camera with the flash on it. Everybody stay here. I'm going to go find the way out of here so we can get out of here. So he goes, and it is pitch black. And he has his camera, and he flashes. This is what he said. He said, I flashed the camera, and it was like couldn't see my hand in front of my face to I can see everything for 10 feet for a split second, and then pitch black again. It's like a horror film, right? He said, there was only two things in my mind at that point. Grizzly bears and serial killers. Like, that's all I can think of, right? Just like, somebody out here is going to kill me. It's a person or an animal, right? Because you just can't see anything. He flashes this light on this camera, finds where they're supposed to go, flashes his way back, grabs the group and gets them together and says, this is what we're going to do. We're all going to hold hands. I'm going to be at the front, and I'm going to have this flash. And we're going to hold hands, and we're going to play the most efficient game of telephone that you've ever played, okay? So this isn't going to be a dysfunctional game of telephone, because our lives depend on it. There are cliffs here. So he says, I'm going to flash, and I'm going to turn to the person behind me and say, okay, take 4 steps. and then you pass that message along. Or I'm going to say, hey, there's a little bit of a drop-off here, and you pass that along. Or I'm going to say, hey, there's a cliff on the left here, don't go to the left, and that's going to be passed along, right? And you can turn the lights back up. They flashed their way with this camera and talked their way for the next 2 hours, just like this pace the whole time. And as he got back, he said it was the most exhausting experience of his life. But it was this inciting incident where the darkness came, right? And the main character of my buddy overcame great obstacles to get the thing that he wanted, which was to be alive and in a car at the end of this. But just a word to the leaders in the room. And if you're sitting in this room, you're a leader. There's somebody in your life that looks up to you and looks to you as a leader. I just got some stuff out of my friend's story. The first thing I got was, if you're a leader, you have to go to some dark, scary places alone before you can lead other people there. Okay? So he went alone flashing that light to some dark, scary places before he would bring anybody else there. So if you're a leader, don't be a jet skier, be a scuba diver. There's some dark, scary places within us that we need to go when those times come where we're called to something more and we're called to change. The second thing he did is he connected his people to one another. He connected his people to one another. He wasn't like, hey guys, just follow my voice, come on. It was like, no, everybody hold hands, and the person at the front hold my hand. The leader can't be everything to everybody. The best thing a leader can do is connect his people or her people to one another. That's the best thing you can do as a leader, is create community where people are connecting to one another, right? But here's the thing. If they had gone to if he had gone to the dark, scary places by himself, if he had connected his people to one another, but didn't have the flashlight, but didn't have the light of the camera, he would have just created a community of people who were holding hands in the dark. If you're a leader and Jesus hasn't been the inciting incident that has overcome you, and taken your will and exchanged his will for your will, you will be creating community where a bunch of people will be holding hands in the dark and you'll be lost and you're confused. The point of this whole thing is that we follow the light. Without the light, they were dead. Without the light, they were spending the night outside. Without the light, they would have never found their way back. The point of this whole thing is that our leaders are surrendered to Jesus and to where he's leading. So my prayer for you is that you would be on the lookout for the inciting incidents, that you would be on the lookout for Jesus. My prayer for you is that we would have open hearts, because the greatest obstacle in our lives is to surrender hearts to Jesus. And my prayer for you as leaders is that you wouldn't just be creating community for people to hold hands in the dark, but that you would trust the light that is guiding you, which is Jesus, on the journey that he's called you to. Amen. Love you guys.